This happened in February of last year. I was pet sitting for a coworker, Lisa, who lives across town and went back to China to visit family for Chinese New Year, looking after her dog, Jimmy Choo. I'd been stuck working from home 3 days a week, so pet sitting and working from Lisa's place, right on the beach, seemed like a nice change of scenery, or so I thought. This weekend was supposed to be relaxing. Unfortunately, it could not have been further from the truth. It was Saturday afternoon, and I was just chilling, watching TV, eating a nice home-cooked meal, all of that kind of stuff, when I heard someone walk up to the front porch. It was around 2 p.m., so I thought maybe the mailman or just some solicitor. But as I stayed sitting on the couch for a few minutes, I realized they still hadn't knocked or rang the doorbell. I never heard them walk away, so it made me curious. I got up and went over to the door to look out the peephole. Sure enough, 2 people were still on the porch. There was a man looking to be in his mid-40s, wearing a heavy jacket and blue jeans, and a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s. They weren't in front of the door, though. They were off to the side, looking around like they were searching for something. I considered opening the door, but I was too nervous to confront them, so I just watched. After 30 seconds, they walked away quickly and got into a parked car on the road by the neighbor's house. Once I saw them drive away, I went out to investigate. Everything looked normal to me, at least everything in the area where they were looking around. I went back inside and mostly forgot about it. Within the hour, I took Jimmy Choo for a quick walk, then started dinner prep a few hours later, and finally turned on a movie to relax with. But before turning the movie on, I let Jimmy Choo out in the backyard to play. I wish I hadn't. Sometime early on in the movie, there was a knock at the door, and Jimmy Choo barked hysterically for a few minutes. I paused the movie and went to see who it was. It was that man from earlier, but this time he was alone. I hadn't seen the woman since they left together earlier. This time, the man was standing in front of the door and waiting for me to answer. I cracked the door open just enough to talk through. The man immediately said with a big smile that he was hoping I'd help him out with something, and that he had asked others, but nobody else had answered. I asked what he needed. He went on to tell me this elaborate story about his car breaking down right next to the house. He pointed at it, and I immediately knew it was the same car I saw him drive away in earlier. Then he said all he needed was to use my phone to make a quick call. Knowing this was some sort of scam or something, I denied him right away and closed the door. I then looked through the peephole to make sure he had left, but he hadn't. I yelled through the door that I'd call the cops if he didn't leave. He stood and thought for a moment, then hurried off, but not to his car. He walked around to the left side of the house. Fearing this was going to escalate, I dialed 911 and told them about the situation. Thank God I did, because seconds later, as I was walking to the back to let Jimmy Choo inside, a sudden crash came from the dining room. Jimmy Choo barked hysterically again from the backyard. I ran over to see what was happening and saw that he'd smashed the window and was crawling through it. I tried to run for the backyard, but the man was quick, chasing me down half the house before grabbing me and holding me still. I fought back, kicking and punching, but he completely overpowered me. He told me through his clenched jaw to be quiet, calling me Lisa, which made me pause for a split second. He insisted that I stop fighting while he dragged me to the front door and opened it. Once I knew what he was doing, I only started fighting harder as he tried to bring me closer to his car. I caught sight of the woman from earlier sitting behind the wheel, waiting. A group of friends walking a dog on the other side of the road saw what was happening and ran over. Before they even reached us, the man let go of me and sprinted back to their car, and they drove away. It all happened so fast. Once the police arrived, they helped calm me down and got all the information I could give them. I told them that the man called me Lisa, which is my coworker's name. Fortunately, they caught the suspects 2 days later when they returned to the neighborhood, likely looking for another opportunity to try again. A neighbor recognized their car and called it in. Of course, I wasn't there. I had gone back home with Jimmy Choo that same night, not taking any chances. During interrogation, they confessed it all. The creepiest part was having my suspicions confirmed when the police told me these people weren't targeting me specifically. Just as I had guessed when he called me Lisa, they were after my coworker, mistaking me for her when they saw me there. The police confirmed what I had already suspected, that since I'm also a Chinese female like my coworker, and we both have long black hair and are a similar height and weight, I fitted the vague description of the target. But that's where the similarities ended. The kidnappers were just opportunists, looking to make a quick buck by ransoming her to her wealthy family back in China. I'll definitely never pet sit again. The thought of being mistaken for someone else in a targeted kidnapping plot still keeps me up at night. My family and I would take regular trips to the woods, heading out at least 5 or 6 times each year in our converted van that served as an additional mobile home during these adventures. We were staying at some place in the mountains, trying out an off-the-grid cabin for the first time, where my sister and I would sleep in the cabin, while our parents stayed in the van. I wasn't that excited for it, because I didn't think it would be as entertaining as our usual spots. I think I was 13 when this incident occurred, around that age at least. When we got there, while my parents were unpacking, my little sister and I wanted to do some exploring. We hiked around for a while, but we didn't go too far, as we didn't know the area, and we didn't want to get disoriented or wander too far from where we would be staying. We talked about anything you would imagine 2 unsupervised children would talk about. I started teasing my little sister, Mary, telling her things like we were completely lost, and to be careful of the wolves and the weird creatures in the woods. Pretty mean, I know, but I thought it was funny. We played tricks on each other like that all the time, but I could tell she was actually starting to become frightened, so I let her know I was only kidding around. I was hoping to find a decent rocky area by the water, like a place where we could step into the water or catch some fish. I discovered the ideal location. She hurried over to it to check it out with me, and I was impressed by the scenery. Our young minds appreciated every moment of the outdoors. I knew we had been gone for quite some time, though, and I was responsible for my sister, and I didn't want us to get in trouble. Mom wanted us back before sunset, and the sun was already starting to set. So we walked back to our cabin, and we ate dinner, and we did our nightly family traditions, like playing card games. We had a small campfire and all that fun stuff, until eventually it was time for bed. Mary and I were staying in the small, off-the-grid cabin, while Mom and Dad stayed in their more luxurious converted van nearby. We got our sleeping bags, a flashlight, and hardly anything else. Maybe some candy that we snuck in, and a tablet to watch a movie. I fell asleep, but I recall waking up for seemingly no reason in a groggy state of mind. I rolled over towards Mary and noticed she was missing. I immediately jumped up. I stepped outside, and I saw her walking towards the path we explored earlier. I asked Mary what she was doing and told her to get back to bed before Mom and Dad found out she was sneaking around. I still don't know how Mary got out of the cabin without me noticing, but she continued walking until eventually she was out of sight. I ended up finding her down the path some distance, thanks to my flashlight, and she was resting by the shallow creek. I grabbed her by the wrist, and I started pulling her towards our cabin, when all of a sudden I saw a figure. It was a man, and there was something seriously disturbing about him. Like seriously, he wasn't only just being a creep by staring at us, but he was clearly very deranged. He stood in the moonlight, just clear enough to make out. He had unkempt blonde hair that appeared unwashed and a patchy beard. He also had some kind of weapon in his grip. The way he was just standing there, breathing heavily through his mouth, and he was incredibly pale. He looked like he hadn't bathed in months. I didn't stay for another second, or even bother to try and talk to him. I was pretty sure he was dangerous. Now the chase began. Mary couldn't match my speed, and she struggled to maintain pace. Remember, she was only 8, so her small legs could only move so fast. I grabbed her arms and practically dragged her to make her go faster. Another problem that we had was we had to get past this man to get back to our cabin. So we literally had to find an alternative route and sprint in a circle around him. If it hadn't been dark, or if we were any farther from our cabin, I don't know what we would have done. We were fairly certain that we lost him, and eventually we met up with Dad. Dad found us some distance from our cabin. I guess we were heading in the wrong direction. You'll never guess what happened after that. When we got back to our cabin, our van was gone, and our mom too. Mom's phone was dead, so she was in the back of the van, charging it, while Dad was out looking for us. She was hoping to call for help. It was a crime of opportunity while we were gone. That creep stole our van, not realizing Mom was in the back of it. She saw he had a gun, so she kept quiet and hid. The first chance she got, she slipped out the back door at a stop sign and called the cops. Many months before this trip, our parents had hidden an AirTag in the van for emergencies. It came in handy, helping us track its location. The police found our van and caught the guy a day later. If we'd been farther into the woods that night, he would have gotten us. By the time Dad got the van back, it was trashed. I had nightmares for months after and never wanted to go back to the woods again. I'm employed at a private security company that handles alarm responses. Some of the residences we monitor are located inside a fancy gated community, including the residents in this story. My job consists mainly of answering alarms for businesses and private residences. Though 99% of the time when I answer an alarm, it's something like a motion detector set off by a dog or a restaurant that forgot to disarm their alarm before stock trucks arrived to unload. This night, I was alerted and called out to a house where a side door alarm was set off. The alarm had detected someone opening it. The residence belongs to a famous retired jewelry designer who frequently travels overseas, and they have lots of expensive jewelry. The homeowner was vacationing in Europe, but she received an alert through her security app and contacted her elderly uncle, who also lived in the gated community, to meet me at the house. I didn't think it was that weird, as this has happened a few times in the past. We then checked the door to the property that was reported to have been opened, but it was closed and locked. We figured maybe someone had tried to open the door but it didn't budge, and that somehow set off the alarm, claiming the door had been opened. We were both honestly satisfied with just leaving it at that, but that's when I noticed a bedroom light was turned on inside the house. I could have sworn that wasn't on when we first arrived. The uncle, who at this point was on the phone with his niece, explained to her how one of the bedroom lights was on. She said that she wasn't sure if she left the light on or not. Now don't get me wrong, being in this field, I'm aware that leaving a light on while you're out of town is a really good idea to make people think someone's home. But in this case, she genuinely couldn't remember if it had been left on. If I'm being honest, this really disturbed me, as like I said before, I was almost positive that light wasn't on when I showed up. The uncle wanted to check inside, though he didn't have a spare key. The jewelry designer on the phone said that a neighbor across the street did, but quickly added that it was late and they were most likely asleep, and we probably shouldn't disturb them. We considered checking the security cameras, but the jewelry designer mentioned on the phone that the system had been acting intermittently, and she couldn't access the live feed remotely at that moment. She said she'd try to troubleshoot it when she had a better connection. So, seeing that there was nothing we could really do, I filled out my papers and went back to my normal patrol. But around half an hour later, I got an alert for this same home. I opened it, and the alert was notifying me that the same door had been detected as being opened. Now, I'm the only one in my zone for this gated community, so again, I had to answer it. When I pull up, I instantly noticed multiple police officers, and 2 uniformed community security guards were already there, talking to both the uncle and the now-awake neighbor from across the street. They were reviewing video footage sent to them by the daughter. One of the officers filled me in and showed me the footage, but what I saw was absolutely horrifying. 4 armed men wearing masks and hoodies were clearly shown coming out of the bathroom a minute after the uncle and I left. They would then proceed to rob the place, taking anything of even slight value, and they were the ones who turned on the bedroom light. It turns out the intruders got away with $100,000 worth of jewelry alone. Thankfully, the most valued pieces were hidden in a safe inside a false wall panel in the master bedroom. I never figured out how, but somehow these men were able to figure out when the jewelry designer would be traveling internationally. The gated community's security code had been compromised somehow. I can't lie, they appeared to be pretty smart about it, obviously wanting a quiet robbery without conflict. But the videos clearly showed that these men had brought high-powered weapons, so they were obviously prepared to blast their way out of trouble if need be. This makes me almost certain that if the uncle had a key, or if we had woken up the neighbor for a key, we would have most likely been shot to death by these guys when we went inside. And it's not like my work gives me a bulletproof vest or anything. I mean, quite honestly, in all my time of working this job, I never really thought I'd run into a serious situation like this. From now on, if I suspect anyone might be inside a property during an alarm call, I'm staying outside no matter what the client says. This job isn't worth dying for, especially after seeing how quickly things can turn dangerous. Each morning, I wake up thankful we didn't enter that house.